a project is an endeavor or an attempt by in which human, material, and financial resources, right? So where we have people, where we have material, right, and of course financial resources, money, they are organized in a novel way. So novel means something that is new, something that's different. So a project is always something that is different from what? Different from past projects. So every project is different in a way. If a project is not different, then you don't need a project. You can just use back the template from previous projects and just implement it. So every project is different, and that's why you need to organize it, to come up with something new, to do it. If it's something that's the same as previous, you don't have to do it. You just take a template and implement it. So it's novel, it's new in some way, right? It may not be completely new, but it's new in some way. So a unique scope of work of given specification, and of course within constraints of cost and time. So you would see this over and over again. A project is something that's new, something that's quite novel. Doesn't need to be completely different from previous projects, but there's something new in it, so you need a project. And given the scope, given the constraints of cost and time. So cost and time and scope. So these are the three most important parameters of a project: scope, cost, and time. And of course, what is the results of the project? You would like the project to deliver something that is beneficial to your stakeholders, right? In quantitative and qualitative manners. So quantitative is something that can be measured. So you can use a measuring tool to measure the outcome, right? So that is very specific, very black and white. So something that can be measured. While qualitative is something that is less specific and cannot be measured in many ways. So quantitative and qualitative. So beneficial changes. So that is a project. So you would like to deliver something that's beneficial to the stakeholders. Now, what is project management? So the project management is application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques, which we have quite a few, as you will see later, in project management to run the project and basically to meet the stakeholder needs. Now, stakeholder is also a term in project management that you will see over and over again. So stakeholder is someone who has a stake in the project. So it can be, obviously it has to be the customer, right? The customer has a stake in the project. So usually the customer would pay for the project, but not always. Sometimes the customer may not pay for the project. Somebody else pays for the project, but the customer is different from the person that finances the project. Who else is the stakeholders? The project team members, they're also stakeholders. Who else are the stakeholders? Suppliers are also stakeholders, right? And of course, the company that the project is running in is also a stakeholder. So you would like to apply the knowledge of project management in such a way on a project so that you're able to meet the stakeholder needs and what is expected from the project. Now, usually what is expected from a project is for companies, mainly it's financial returns. So how do we measure financial returns? A lot of times we measure it through ROI, return on investment. So you invest a certain amount of money and you expect to profit from it. You expect to get a return from that amount of money that you invest. So a lot of times companies would measure the success of a project or the expectations from a project that way, because the company operates in that way. Now, if if it's not a company, maybe a non-profit organization, probably they will look at more qualitative measures, right? Where the expectation or the scope of the project would necessitate an improvement in maybe the quality of health in that society, or the quality of life in a certain area. So that is more qualitative rather than quantitative. So in general, for corporations, for companies, it is more quantitative, where you can actually measure it, right? So projects are usually quite complex. So we use project management to develop a structure, right, where independent variables of time, cost, and resources and human behavior come together. So again, we see out of the three, time, cost, and scope, we see two here, time and cost. Resources is also cost. So when we talk about human resources, that's also cost, and human behavior. So a lot of times project managers tend to focus on the techniques of project management, but in the end, at the end of the day, project management is also about getting a group of people together to implement the project, to deliver something that is expected from the project, to deliver something beneficial for the project. So you're actually managing a group of people. So human behavior will definitely come into play, and that a lot of times is quite complex, especially in a large project. Okay. So again, please feel free to ask any questions along the way, so that we can clear up your doubts if you have any. So what are the important characteristics of a project? What are the parameters of a project? Now, first and foremost, the project needs to have a purpose, right? So there needs to be a purpose, there needs to be a clearly defined specification outcome for the project. If there's no purpose, then the project is maybe not very specific. So there needs to be a purpose, right? So that everyone knows where the project is heading. So that is very important. So clearly defined outcomes with an element of complexity. So that means that projects by itself needs to be somewhat complex. If it's too simple, you will not need a project, right? You probably just need a process. So you need clearly defined outcomes. There's some complexity in it that you need to run a project. And of course, you need to coordinate the resources, the schedule, so that it can come together to implement the project. PLC, project life cycle, right? So as you'll see later, projects go through different cycles, and especially in the what we call the waterfall technique, there are five cycles in general for the waterfall technique. It can be shorter, right, where we can merge some of these life cycles together. But as you see, there's a life cycle. Right? Now, projects can also be interdependent, right? How are they interdependent? They are linked to other projects. So, for example, you need a certain component from another project, and if the project is delayed, then a component is delayed, and that would affect your project. Right? And of course, it's also dependent on human resource that may be assigned to other projects as well. So probably you have a very skilled technician that is assigned to two projects, and he or she could not work on your project if he or she is working on the other project. So that needs some management. Right? Now, uniqueness. So projects are unique, as we said earlier in the first slide, in some way. it cannot be exactly the same as a previous project. If it's exactly the same, you do not need a project. So by definition, it needs to be unique, and because it's unique, it needs customizing. Right? It needs customizing. Conflict. You're always competing for resources. What kind of resources? You're competing for funding, right? So there's no infinite funding, so you need to compete with other projects for funding, right? So that's conflict, because if there's more money for another project, then there's less money for your project, because the pot of funding is finite. Now, the other thing that we always compete for also is human resource, right? Because human resource is finite. So if you want, let's say, a certain marketing manager on your team, right? But the marketing manager is already allocated to other projects, and he or she does not have other slots for you, then you do not have her expertise in your, or his or her expertise in your project. So you're always competing for resources, obviously funding, money, and of course human talent. Right? Now, also I think sometimes this is a bit understated. Is risk. There's always risk in any project. So I don't think I've managed a project that's no risk, but it's dependent on the project itself, what kind of projects that you're undertaking. But there's always risk. It's just whether it's high risk, medium risk, or low risk. So if it's high risk, obviously you want or the company will want a higher return on a project, right? If it's a lower risk, then you can make do with a lower return. But there's always risk in any project. So that you have to keep in mind. Now, just to give an overview of the kinds of projects that are they're out there, ranging from the simplest to probably the most complicated, right? Most complicated. So if you look at the x-axis here, or look at the horizontal axis here, you'll find that this goes by complexity. Now, in the word here, complexity, is used to define how many people are involved in the project. So you can see that you start from individual, right? Just one person on a project. So if it's just one person, it's not complex at all, right? Because you do not have to manage anybody else, right? It's just you, and you're in total control of yourself, right? To a group, right? A group of people, maybe 5 people or 10 people, to an organization. So this is, if you look at this is an organization-wide project that involves everybody in the company, right? So for example, a company audit would involve everybody in the company, or most of the people in the company. Multi-organization, where you have more than one organization, so 2, 3, or 4 that needs to cooperate together to implement a project. So if you look at the airport, for example, you would have a multi-organization project trying to implement multi-organization effort to try to implement the project. So airport would have the customer that belongs to one organization, and you also have the main contractor, and also many other subcontractors that are there to implement the project. Right. So it gets more complex. So if you look at where it involves the whole nation, you would have the expressways, right, where the expressways actually connect one country to another country. Thames Barrier is on the Thames River, right, to avoid flooding in London, right. So this is also a national project, and of course, military campaigns are national efforts. Now, of course, the most complex is where you involve more than one nation. So, if you look at some of the projects here, like Airbus, that involves the French and the German government, and look at the Channel Tunnel that would involve UK and France, and of course, the most complex of it all will be the Euro project, where it involves I believe 28 nations, maybe now 27 after the pull-out from UK, right? Now, so on the vertical axis, you would have, how uncertain the project is, because when we use uncertain, we actually refer to, has the project been done before? Is this the first time that we're doing a project, or has this project been implemented before in different variations? Because we discussed that project has to be unique in some way, right? So has it been done before, but in different variations? So for example, if you look at novel writing, right, has it been done before, but in different variations? So obviously there are many kinds of novels outside with many genres. So obviously that's been done before, but in different variations, right? So if you look at novel writing, that is quite, it's not complex because it's an individual effort, right? And it's also, it has quite a low uncertainty because it has been done before, right? Most probably you can finish a novel, right? Because many novels are already out there in the marketplace. But of course, if you want it to be a highly successful novel, that's another thing altogether. But to finish it, it has been done many times before, right? So the uncertainty is low. So if you look at this group wedding, right, has been done before many times. Product development, right, that is a bit higher on the uncertainty level, right, has been done before somewhat, but maybe there's some risk in this project that needs to overcome. Oil and gas exploration is quite risky because you could explore a territory, you could explore a certain area and hoping that you can struck oil, but oil is not there. And of course, basic research is basically a blue sky effort, so that is quite uncertain. So you could see how we categorize projects along the horizontal and the vertical axis, right? So obviously the Euro project is highly complex and highly uncertain because it involves 28 countries, and of course this has not been done before when it first started in 1998, right? So highly uncertain. So why is there a need for projects? Well, projects are becoming, I would say products and services becoming more and more complex, right? So you can just imagine handphones. How often do you change your handphones, right? And the functions that you have in your handphones nowadays, well, the handphones are not just for making telephone calls. It's also, to communicate using WhatsApp, to take photos, to listen to music, to watch videos. So it's very it's very complex as compared. I mean, we don't feel it now because we are quite used to it. But if you compare it to maybe 10 years back, 15 years back, or 20 years back, the handphone has gotten quite complex. Because if you look at 20 years back, when I had my first handphone, or 25 years back, it was just used to make a call, right? And now it's used for other things as well. I mean, entertainment and videos and audio. But it was just used to make a call, and probably in the year in the earlier years also to SMS. So that was all to handphones. But now it's becoming rather complex. We also have impatient customers, impatient consumers. They want it, within a short period of time. here and now, maybe due to the internet or the effect where you want it immediately. So customers they do not want to wait 2-3 years for the next product. They want it right now, probably within 6 months. So that places a lot of pressure on companies to develop new products. Now, global products, global markets and competition. Now, we are no more for I think all countries, or almost all countries in this world, we are no more localized markets. Maybe for the exception of North Korea, we are competing in global markets. So that means that we have to be faster and better, right? And of course, because of that, we need to run better projects, right? Plan and run better projects, and because of that, products and processes have to respond to that. So we have to look at how products needs to be designed and how processes need to be modified so that we can respond to this increasing demanding expectations. Now, this is the project life cycle. I think we hinted at this probably in the earlier slides. So this is a typical, what we call a waterfall project. So comprising of several phases or several stages. So you could see that the first stage is conception, right, where you conceive the project, what the project is about, right? What is the scope of the project? What is the purpose of the project? And you have the second phase where you select probably from different alternatives or different options that you have and from there you can select the best option and run that plan. And the third phase would be to basically implement the project, right? To plan, implement, and to monitor the project. So monitoring and control, these are special words in project management, which means that you monitor the progress of the project, right? And then control. So control means in project that if a project has overrun its schedule, how do you bring it back on schedule? And if it has overrun its budget, how do you bring it back on budget? So monitoring and control. So planning, scheduling, monitoring, and control. And finally, when you have completed a project, where you have to evaluate the end product, right? Is it successful? Does it meet the specs? Does it meet the customer's expectations, right? You probably have to write a project report at the end, and of course the last of the items will be to terminate the project because the project is finished, right? So if you look at this curve here, this would be the amount of effort that is needed. So intuitively you would think that, or most of us would think that, at the beginning of a project you do not need too many people in the project because a lot of times it's coming up with the required paperwork, a lot of thinking, a lot of research, but you don't need too many people in the project. So, but this level of effort will grow and of course reach its peak somewhere in the middle, where you need quite a big team of people to implement the project, right? To run the project, to do the things that needs to be done in the project. And of course, towards the end, when the project is finishing, you also need less and less manpower, right? For the project. So towards the end here, a lot of times the staff can be assigned to other projects, because you do not need them at this point in time, so they can be assigned to other projects. Okay, so how long this phase is dependent on your project. For shorter projects, it could be as short as 1 month. For long projects, for example, construction, or to develop a complete new product, like this could be 2 years. So dependent on the project. So this is an overview of the life cycle. So define, plan, organize, control, and close. So as we have referred to earlier, probably the first couple of stages is to define what a project is about, plan the project, and then over here, next two phases is to implement the project. And once you have finished implementing a project, then to close the project. So what does closing a project means? Obtaining client acceptance, ensuring you deliver all the deliverables that's needed, documenting the project, final report, and project audit. So try to determine what has gone well in the project, what can be done better, so that this can be future learnings for other projects. Now, if you look at this is more of a waterfall approach. So where, as the name implies, is one way, where you move from one stage to the next. And once you move from one stage to the next, you do not go back. Right? So it's one way. Hence the waterfall, because the water only flows in one direction. So you don't go back. Now, there's other methodologies as well, other than the waterfall approach. So we have the Agile approach, where it's not one way, where there is what we say incrementation, where you I should say iteration and incrementation. So every time you iterate, you increment another deliverable. So this is not a waterfall approach, because you're not going from one phase to the next phase and not going back there again, right? This is more iteration. So where you plan, you implement the project, implement the things that needs to be done, you deliver it, but then you go back to planning again. You go back to planning again. So just to compare, here you don't do that. You plan, you implement, and then you close. But here you plan, you implement, you close, but then you go back to planning again. So that's where the iteration is. Now, this is used widely in software projects, where you can break up the software into parts, or the project into parts, and then implement it by parts. So you choose you choose an item to implement. So you plan, you implement that item, and then you deliver the item, and then you go back to the planning phase again, where you pick the next item to implement. So this is iteration. So not waterfall. So it's agile, where we plan, implement, deliver, and we go back to planning again. So not just one way, but iterations. But every time you iterate, you increment, you increase another deliverable. You increase another deliverable. Right? So increment and iterate, or iterate and increment. So this is, I'm not sure whether you've heard of SCRUM, but SCRUM is a method, one of the agile methods to do this iterate and increment, where you plan, you implement, and then you deliver, and then you go back and you plan again, implement, and then you deliver. So SCRUM is a very popular method in software project management. I think the majority of the software firms will use this method to run their projects, including many of the IT projects. Now, this is just a model for change. So I just want to show this slide just to give an idea what projects are about. Projects are about improvements, right? So going from the current state that the product is in, or the service is in, and then trying to improve on that product so that you reach a higher state. So it's always improvement, right? So according to Lewin, if one wants to improve, there needs to be some unfreezing, right? As we have learned from physics, right? Inertia, right? So you need to unfreeze the inertia, right? So that it gets moving again. So you need to unfreeze. So you need to improve, or the product needs to improve, and then this needs to freeze again to the desired state. Freeze again so that you don't go back to the previous state, right? To the previous state. So just to give you an idea that projects are always about improvement to better products, better services, better processes, right? So and as we have also noted before, projects are managing human behavior. So here gives an overview of the different levels that needs to be managed. So the project manager is in the middle. So project manager needs to manage the project team, needs to manage the senior management, right? And of course, the project manager would have a team underneath him or her where a lot of the project analysis is done. And as well as managing across, managing other project managers as well, so that when it comes to resources, in terms of funding, in terms of getting the people that you want into your team, there's some kind of negotiation that you can get into. So the many different levels of project management in terms of managing the different levels of people in the projects. Now, the iron triangle. Now, this is as we're always looking for three things in projects, right? Cost, time, and quality or scope, right? So a lot of times you can be you hope to meet all three, right? But if you want something that is cheap, fast, usually it's at the expense of quality or scope. If you need something that is of high quality and fast, usually it needs to be you need to put in quite a bit of resources in terms of money. Or if you want it to be high quality and cheap, you probably need a longer time to implement the project. So out of these three, you have to pick two, right? So you can't have something that is fast, cheap, and good quality, right? So if something that's good quality and and fast, it probably will cost the project quite a bit. Or if something that's high quality and cheap, you probably need a longer time to implement the project, right? If it's fast and cheap, usually it's at the expense of quality. So this is what we call the iron triangle, right? The iron triangle. Now, we have only looked at the three areas of projects: scope, time, and cost. But of course, if you look at the wider project management literature, there are other things that needs to be managed as well, right? As we've seen previously, quality, right? So you need to manage quality as well in terms of quality management, QM, or quality control, QC, right? What are the parameters to monitor, right? Also, human resources. You need to manage the human resources in the team, right? And of course, in the company. Communications, right? How do you communicate the project status to the management? How do you have communications between team members? How do you communicate the project parameters to the customers? Or how do you update the customers of the project progress? So these are there are many things in communication that needs to be done, and done in a proper manner. Risk as well, right? Evaluating the risk that is in the project, right? Identifying it, which are high risks, which are risks that are medium risk, which are the risks that are low risk, right? And procurement, managing of suppliers, managing of items that need to be purchased for the projects. So these are the 9 key areas for planning. Other attributes of projects, right? So projects need to be aligned with the business strategy, right? So if the projects do not benefit the company, then you can question whether this project is important for the company, and whether this project needs to be changed or eliminated because it's not aligned with the business strategy. Now, projects are cross-functional, right? Because they involve people from different areas. Projects have, as you have seen in the previous slide, you have 9 key areas. So you need to have people from these 9 key areas to work together, right? Obviously, the most important key areas are scope, time, and cost. Interdependencies. Projects may depend on other projects, or they may depend on human resources from other projects. So there's interdependencies between projects, and maybe from other organizations as well, because your project may depend on another project from another organization. So there's interdependencies. So not only you have to keep watch within your project, you also have to keep watch of projects that is not under you, but under another project manager in your company, or not within your company. Uncertainty, right? So projects are inherently risky, so you need to identify risks, right? Whether it's high risk, medium risk, or low risk. Now, just some project management techniques, just to introduce it quickly, I think, before we go on to Microsoft Project. Now, we have one of the techniques for Microsoft Project, for project management, is what we call work breakdown structure. So basically breaking down what you need to do, right? Breaking down the tasks, and breaking down a big task to smaller tasks. So for example, if the task is to build a house, now that is a very big task. So you need to break it down into several areas, right? Civil, right? So where the foundations are laid and the walls and the roof are put up, and then the plumbing, right? And then underneath you have the piping and the sewerage, and electrical, where you have the wiring and the appliances, right? So you have a big task, right? So you try to break down the task into smaller tasks, right? So which you can estimate the resources that are needed in a clearer way. So for example, you can estimate how many people needs to work on the foundations, for example, and how many days they need to work on the foundation. Right? So if you just to have it on the topmost level, the house, for example, building a house, it's very difficult to estimate how many people are needed to work on a house. That's one. And how many days does it take to work on that house? So both on the resource and on the time element. So you need to break it down into smaller parts to have a better estimation. So this is what we call a work breakdown structure. And this is an important concept of project management, where you take a big task and try to break it down into smaller tasks so that you can have a better estimate of the resources that you need. Now, one of the many challenges of project management is changing the goal itself, the project goal itself, or changing the project scope itself. Now, if you go back to probably the first slide, one of the most important things is to determine what is the project purpose, what is the project goal, what is the scope of the project. Now, if that changes, everything else beneath it changes. Now, you would ask, why would a project goal change? Well, for many reasons sometimes. Most of the time, the project goals change because the markets have changed. The markets have changed. So, for example, if you look at the handphone markets, the markets are basically smartphone markets, right? You probably don't have phones, or there are very few phones that are actually just phones that are just to make calls and send SMS. Now, if you don't change those goals to align the markets, then you lose market share and you'll be toppled over by your competitors. So, for example, 20, 25 years ago, probably most of us here, we use Nokia for our phones. But I mean, now I think barely anyone uses Nokia. Most of us will use Samsung, Apple phone, right? So a lot of times the goals are changed because of the markets. The markets have changed and your goals have to change with it. It could be also that there's new information, right? So for example, your competitor comes up with something that, you know, is exactly the same as, you know, what you're working on. And because of that, you probably have to change your product or your services in some way so that, you know, it doesn't, it's not exactly the same as your competitors, right? It could be technical failure or change. There could be a technical item in the product that you could not overcome, so you need to, you know, go around it, change the product in some way so that, you know, you do not have to deal with that technical item. Other things, right? Unclear corporate goals. You know, sometimes the corporate goals are not clear. The company is all over the place, right? Basically, the project is not aligned with the company. And also priorities, limited funding. So probably the company needs to concentrate on, you know, the top few projects that are important to them, and also changes elsewhere. Now, why use Microsoft Project? Why plan at all if projects are so complicated and so uncertain, right? Projects are often complex. I mean, that is by definition, right? And people that work on their projects need to know what is their role and what they need to do, right? On not only on a monthly basis, but on a daily basis, what they need to do, right? So you need to coordinate the people that is working on the projects. And also, by having a plan, by having a detailed plan, you give confidence to your customers, right? So if you don't have a plan, the first thing that will occur to you is that you will not know whether are you on track or are you not on track. Is a project on schedule or not on schedule? Is a project on budget or it's not on budget? So that's why I need a plan, so that you know, are you proceeding in the right direction? So whether rescheduling is necessary, whether anything underlying project needs to be changed. So if, for example, if you're not on schedule, probably some of the items that is in the project needs to be relooked at to see whether it really needs to be in the project or not. Now, so just to give you an overview, so Microsoft Project, so you could see the Microsoft Project Gantt chart here. So you can see a task here. So this is the Gantt chart, okay? And also the project network. Now, let me go to Microsoft Project. Then we just have a quick look at it. New share. So can you all see the Microsoft Project screen? So you could see that that here you have the tasks. So here you have the task here. So for example, create architectural plans, right? So that's a task that would take 3 weeks, and it would start from Monday, 6th of May, 2019 to 24th of May 2019. And then this would follow with submit plans for approval, order materials, and then finally we have the planning completed phase. Right. So important thing here is this. If you look at the task, you have the duration, start, finish, and you also have something what we call the predecessor. So if you look at the predecessor, so you look at the task here, task 3, right? The predecessor is 2, right? The predecessor is 2. So that means that this task is dependent on this previous task. So you can't start this task until this task is finished. And this task is finished. So you could see from here all the tasks of the project. Right? And here is the phases of the project. So planning, site works, building construction, fit out, commissioning. So all these tasks belongs to this phase. Right? Belongs to this phase. And you could see here this last item here, which is a milestone that is dependent on 4, 2, and 3. So 4, 2, and 3. So that means that you need these 3 tasks to be completed before the planning phase is completed. Okay, so that's on the task here. If you go to here, this is the Gantt chart. So you could see the Gantt chart. So create architectural plans, right? So that takes 3 weeks. So you could see the duration here. You could see the people that's working on the chart or on the task, right? And all the way until the end of the project, right? So the project finishes on 7th of May 2020. So what Microsoft project would do, it would automatically calculate the end of the project, the end of the project, after you have put in all the information. You could also see the project information. So project information. Statistics. So you could see how long the project takes, right? 253 days. How many hours does it take? 26,000 hours. And how much does the project cost? 3.06 or 3.07 million. 3.07 million. So that's the project tasks and the Gantt chart. You could also look at the resources that's being used in the project. So you have the team planner. So for example, these are the people that are being used in the project. Right. So you could see over here, when are they being used and what is the task they're being used for. Okay. You can also set rates for them. So for example, if you click on the carpenter, right, you could see what is their rates, right? What is their normal rates or standard rates, right? If they're working during normal operating hours, and what is the overtime rate if they are working beyond the normal operating hours. So you go back to here. So you can have an overview of also the project, by looking at some of the reports. So for example, oops. Right. What is the total cost of a project and how it is split up, right? So for example, 1.2 million of the project is being spent on material. 931,000 of it is being spent on human resource, right? On the staff working on the project, right? So here you can have an overview. You can also have right, the cost that's being spent on different phases of the project. So on planning, 29,000 is being spent, site works, 60,000, building construction, 1.693 million, fit out, 1.2 million, commissioning, 35,000. So you see that most of the cost actually goes towards the building construction phase, which is the implementation phase, where you need most of the staff in the project. Okay, so I hope this gives you a quick overview of what project management is, and also Microsoft Project is. Any questions? Anybody? Any questions? Okay. If okay, so let me just put up the last couple of slides here. So have a new share. So if you would like to know more about, or if you're interested and would like to know more about project management and of course Microsoft Project, you can participate in the upcoming course on 20th July and 21st of July next month. Okay, so you can contact. So the course is from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. So we'll go through all of the features of Microsoft Project. So at the end of the day, you'll be able to put any project that you want to implement, put any project that you have planned into Microsoft Project, and the output from the Microsoft Project can then be used to run your projects. So it's 9 to 5 p.m. So if you're interested, you can contact Miss Rina. Her email is rina@aventislearning.com.